There is an old folk tale about a man named Nasruddin. In this story, a friend invites Nasruddin to a banquet. During the day, Nasruddin went about his regular day work. He had his old patchwork coat on, and suddenly he realized that, oh my, I'm going to be late. I'm going to be late to this banquet that I've been invited to. And so he decided not to go in and change and clean up. He just decided to go. And along the way, he ran into somebody who was trying to catch a goat that had run away. And so he stopped and he helped to catch the goat. And by the time he arrives at his friend's house, he is obviously dirty and smelly, not exactly what they were expecting. In fact, all his friends, the servants, the other guests, all ignored him. So Nasruddin decided to go home quick, clean up, and put on a magnificent new coat, and then return to the banquet. Well, when he got there, everyone was so happy to see him. They welcomed him. They set all this delicious food in front of him. And so Nasruddin proceeds to feed his coat. He says, "Eat, coat, eat." And he starts stuffing the food into his coat. Well, the hosts and the guests were appalled. And Nasruddin says, "Why, surely you wanted my coat to eat. Because when I first got here in my old coat, there was no food before me. But yet when I came back in the new coat, there was all this food for me. That shows me that you wanted my coat to eat and not me. My coat was invited to your banquet, not me." You know, we snicker about the story. It's kind of ridiculous to think of somebody stuffing all the food in his coat. But the underlying point of the story is quite serious. And that is what James was trying to convey to us in this passage this morning. You see, they were playing favorites in a time when the rich were really oppressing the poor. In fact, the rich were taking the poor to court to keep them oppressed. And so James is pointing out that that's not just happening in the courts. It is happening in the worship service. You are doing the exact same thing as they're doing to the poor in the courts. I always like to think of a modern day example of how this might have played out. And I started thinking about celebrities and how, they're held up to be these high and mighty people. You can insert however you want, politicians, whatever. And you think about when a celebrity goes to a restaurant or endorses a product or something, all of a sudden everybody needs to go to that. Everybody needs to buy that product, you know. And so part of what was happening in the church is that, well, if we get these rich people coming in and we, oh, yes, you are in a place of honor, let's put you up here. They're basically saying you are far more important, not just because you're important, but because of what you can do for us. Well, if we get more important people to come here, more people will come. If we get the rich to come, well, there's more possibility of generous giving. The Greek word for favoritism used here is plural. And we don't get that when we're reading the scripture passage, but it's plural, meaning that it's not just this one thing that they were showing favoritism about. But they were focusing on the external factors of the people that were coming. So that could be dress, it could be their color of skin, their general appearance, obviously their wealth. And they were breaking a law that was told to them way back in Leviticus, where judges were even forbidden to discriminate between the rich and the poor on the basis of appearance. But they were to decide cases impartially. So basically, James is telling them, you are failing at this law. And then James goes to point out what Jesus had to say. That we are to love others as ourselves. And emphasizes that mercy is what is supposed to win over judgment. Just as a reminder of what mercy means. In the dictionary, it is described as kind and compassionate treatment, a disposition of forgiveness. Now, James does talk about how God blesses the poor, how they are given the kingdom. And I don't think that he's saying they're the only ones. What I think he's focusing on is that the poor probably recognize their need for Christ a lot more easily than the rich did. I mean, if you think about it, when things are going well for us, when life is good, when we seem to have enough to meet our needs, it's kind of easy to shove God off to the side, to not really think about God a whole lot, because life's going well. But when life throws us a curveball, when things are tough, when we don't know how we're going to pay a bill, that's when we find that we cry out to God the most, when tragedies happen. Then at the end of today's scripture, James talks a little bit about the knowing and the doing. You see, we can pack all of the knowledge of the Bible into our heads. In fact, there are Bible scholars out there that know the ins and outs of everything in the Bible. But if it doesn't start to transform our hearts, then it doesn't do anybody much good. Just as the story that he draws out about the brother or sister who came upon the person in rags, who was hungry, whose clothing was less than great. And basically what this brother and sister did was say, "You need Christ. Good luck with that," and walks away. But that's not what God calls us to. It's not just supposed to be words. What I really want to focus on today is, what does the scripture have to do with today? Because we run into a little bit different issues today than they did back then. People coming into worship, appearances won't necessarily tell you whether they're rich or poor. I know people who drive a fancy car, who have the latest, greatest electronics, who dress really nice and all of that, but they are so deep in debt that they don't know how they're going to